Okay, I think it's 2 o'clock, so let's go ahead and begin. Hi, everybody, and welcome to PHS Live. My name is Fred Tangeman, and I'm Director of Communications at PHS. Today, what we're going to be doing is taking an in-depth look at PHS's historic Bible collection. And in the process, we're going to learn a lot about rare books. So leading that conversation today is Gabriela Zoller, who is PHS's very own librarian and rare books specialist. So in addition to knowing a lot about rare books, Gabriela is the main cataloger of collection materials at PHS, and she also manages our digital archives, Pearl. A couple of programming notes before we get started on the conversation. My communications colleague, Kristen Gatos, is moderating the chat today. If you have questions about today's session, please go ahead and click the Q&A button. And if you're viewing the session over Zoom, you can see that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also participate in the conversation by using the webinar's chat button. And that as well can be found at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. So let's go ahead and bring Gabriela into the conversation. Hello, Gabriela.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm okay.
Yeah? Are you feeling rested and ready for today's session?
Not particularly. I feel ready, but not rested. Let's say that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world right now, so we especially appreciate people taking a break from the news to hear about Bibles and rare books today. So let's go ahead and get started by having Gabriela go ahead and introduce herself. I did a little bit of an introduction for you, Gabriela. I hope I didn't step on yours already, but if you want to go ahead and tell people a little bit more about yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. I would just add that the way I learned to catalog rare books, I've been a cataloger for a while, between 10 and 15 years. But I was fortunate when I came to PHS to be sent to Rare Book School in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I did a week-long course on rare book cataloging, which is where I learned pretty much everything I'm going to tell you today. It's an incredible class. And if you're like a book nerd, it's kind of summer camp for librarians. So it's a lot of fun, and they have a very diverse course offering. So if you are kind of a librarian, archives professional, or there's people who go just who don't even work in the profession. So that's my stumping for Rare Book School. It's really fun.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like it would be fun for lots of different people. And I think that's one of the good ways to start us off is we're going to be talking about Bibles, but as we move towards focusing on Bibles, we want to hear about rare books a little bit first. So Gabriela, could you tell us just first of all, what is a rare book?
What is a rare book? Yeah.
Yeah. What's a rare book? What makes a book rare? And is there any kind of universal standard for rare books that folks should know about?
Yeah. So I think the librarians and archivists use the term rare very specifically, and it's a little bit different than the way we use it in everyday speech. So for librarians, or bibliographically speaking, a rare book is one that was produced between the invention of the printing press around 1440 and 1800, and that's what's known as the hand press era. And then after 1800, there's enough changes in the technology of printing and paper production that it becomes increasingly mechanized, and so we move out of the hand press era. So when a librarian or a rare book collector is speaking about rare books, they mean things published before 1800. There's a little bit of wiggle room there when you talk about like America versus Europe, but that's what we mean. So in kind of normal parlance, if people, non-librarians, normal human beings are talking about rare things, they might mean something from the 20th century, like a manuscript copy of Ulysses or Audubon's Birds of America. And those things certainly are rare and scarce and valuable, but librarians call those special collection items. So again, rare kind of very specifically means pre-1800 publications. And the fact of the matter is that some of the early Bibles we have in our collection are actually not so much scarce. They're not rare because they're scarce, but they're rare again because they were produced during this particular period in printing history. So sometimes there's actually more copies of these Bibles than something that was published, in the 19th century, but they're still significant and valuable because of the specific conditions in which they were produced. And they also tell us a lot about the culture that produced them. And then, of course, they're also important because of the actual content of the book.
Great. PHS has a lot of Bibles. We have a lot of materials in general, but we have a huge Bible collection. So as a starter for getting into looking at that collection, do you have a sense of how many Bibles we have at PHS?
I sure do. And now I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint.
Awesome.
Give you guys some visuals. So we have about 800 complete Bibles or sections or books of the Bibles in the Bible collection. The number is a little inexact because they're cataloged, as you see here in this picture on the screen, on card catalog cards, and most of them have been converted into electronic records in our online library catalog. So the counting is hand counting. So I didn't do like a perfect job. I'm not counting votes, thankfully, counting catalog cards. So it's around 800, maybe give or take 25 on either side. So of those, about 20% are from the hand press era, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the things that were published before 1800.
Great. And so, there's a lot of different ways to probably distinguish between Bibles. Can you talk a little bit about, of the vast number at PHS, how those are kind of sorted, or what ways the staff uses to differentiate between them?
Yeah, let's see. The way, are you asking about how we actually store them or how they're classified?
Yeah, I mean, either that, or even, what as you look at the entire collection, what are things that makes them different from each other? For instance, if they are in different languages or come from different eras. You talked about the hand press era.
Yeah.
Any information like that?
Well, one way they are organized is by language.
Looky there.
Yeah. What a happenstance that I have the slide here. So as you can see, the lion's share are in English, but there's a somewhat surprising to me anyway when I did this distribution of non-English languages, particularly languages that are not really languages of the Christian world. So a lot of these are from the kind of non-English, non-Western European translations are missionary Bibles. So they were meant to be taken into the mission field to evangelize. And a lot of those date from the 19th century. But we do have a leaf of a Bible that's called the Elliott Bible. It was published in 1663. So it's the first Bible published in British America or in the British colonies. And it is a translation of the Bible into Algonquin. So it was done by Elliott because he wanted to missionize to the Algonquin tribe. So we actually have, again, just a leaf of this Bible. We don't have a whole copy of it, but it's actually on, I almost said on sale. It's on loan to the Museum of the Reformation in Geneva, Switzerland right now, which is very exciting. They're doing an exhibition on Calvin in America. So it is in Switzerland, and we can't show it to you today. But just again, it's very interesting. I was surprised to see that there was such an early translation into a Native American language in our collection.
That's great, and that I think that's one that we I think Kristen wanted to kind of provide that link to that Reformation in Geneva link into the chat at this time or later on in the session. That just got me wondering, Gabriela, about something that I'm sure you don't have any detailed information on, but I wonder if you would speculate. How is it that we would have just one page of that Bible?
I suspect that it was all that was available to a Bible collector. Maybe, so a lot of our Bible collection came to us from a donor called Henry Mccook, who is a former president of the society, a Bible collector, a naturalist, an author, sort of a 19th century gentleman. He collected Bibles and gave a lot of them to PHS. And I suspect that at some point in his life, he was able just to buy one sheet, like somebody had an Elliott Bible and broke it up because they knew that if they sold it page by page, they'd make more money.
Wow.
That's the sad thing that happens to books sometimes.
Well, and that's a great thing to bring up, because we, at PHS, we have a section of the building that is set aside for rare books, and it's kind of known as the rare book room, or sometimes we refer to it as the rare book cage, um, which is yeah. Anyway, let me go ahead and ask you about that space a little bit. What is it about that space that causes it to stand out from other parts of the building?
So while we're talking about it, I'm actually going to share a little video we have that will show people what our rare book room looks like. This is from a virtual tour that was put together by Kristen and Fred. So here I am in the rare books room. So basically a rare book, well, usually has an extra level of security on it because of the valuable contents that are held therein. And there's also typically special temperature and humidity controls that are meant to preserve works on paper. At PHS, because we have so many works on paper or paper-based collections in the archives, we actually are very careful with our temperature and humidity control in other parts of the building, as well as the rare book vault. So we're a little bit unusual in that we're careful kind of across the board.
Yeah. And what are some other things that might be found in that rare book room besides Bibles?
Sorry. Okay, good. I successfully ended that screen share. Let's see. There's a lot of sermons. There's a lot of theological works and treatises by early Reformation leaders. There's things by John Knox, Calvin. There are early publications of the American Presbyterian Church and American Presbyterians. Oh, and actually, I wanted to give you another visual. So here's some results from the rare book collection in our online library catalog. So you can see a Westminster Catechism, a vindication of the validity and divine right of Presbyterian ordination, etc. A view of popery, some anti-Catholic literature, etc.
Great. And that's an important thing, right, for our researchers and people just viewing this session to know about, is that some of the items that we have in the rare books room are only cataloged in non-digital electric systems. So some of that has not been put onto that sort of that online catalog that you just showed off.
Yeah.
Great. And you mentioned the wonderful Henry Mccook a little while ago. We've spoken a little bit about this, and you were telling me about his contributions to the society, but also how our collection materials sort of have come through his private library. So could you tell us a little bit more about Henry Mccook?
Yeah, so here he is on your screen with his dog. He must have been a lover of dogs as well. Gosh, I don't know what to say about him that I haven't already said. So again, he was, I don't know.
It's always that way with the most interesting people.
Yeah, he seems like one of these guys who kind of was like a polymath and had his hand in a little bit of everything. He did serve as a Union soldier. I guess his family was known as the Fighting Mccooks. And so he fought in the Civil War on the Union side. But he, at some point, amassed a significant Bible collection and donated it to PHS. Again, he was a naturalist. He wrote books about ants, and we have a lot of those materials in the collection. So that's kind of out of scope of Presbyteriana, but it's interesting that we get these books about ants thanks to Henry Mccook's association with the society. But back to Bibles. What you see on the screen on the right-hand side is the title page of the earliest item in the collection. And this is the 1516 Erasmus New Testament in Greek. So this is like 1 year before Luther even publishes the 95 Theses. So it's kind of incredible that we have this over 500-year-old book, and it's thanks to Henry Mccook.
Yeah, great. So yeah, that's you mentioned Erasmus's Bible right there. This maybe is a good time to sort of talk a little bit more about not only the historical period in which that Bible was translated and published, but also the technology that surrounded its its publishing and its dissemination. in Europe. So the Reformation and the printing press and the non-Latin Bible sort of grow up together in that period. Can you talk just a little bit about how those things fit together and how they connect back to the Bible collection at PHS?
Sure. So what you have on your screen now is a very condensed and admittedly Eurocentric history of printing on the left, and then a history of the Bible on the right, because I wanted to have you have these two timelines, and we're going to talk about kind of where they intersect around the Reformation. So we're going to jump into the history of printing. I know I'm skipping a lot of stuff, I'm aware, but it's long. So we're going to drop right into medieval Europe, where the written word texts are being created by monks who are working in scriptoriums. So they're copying and then recopying texts laboriously by hand. I have a typo on my slide. Oh, imagine that there's only one period after hand. A monk would have never done that. So they're copying text by hand. And so the texts that are produced are very special. And in order to use them, you have to go to the monastic library. Maybe you're wealthy enough that you have it in your private collection, but they're not texts for everybody. They're very special things. Most people can't read. If they can, they can't read the languages that these texts are being copied in. So then once we get to the Renaissance, some of that copying work becomes commercialized. And so there's slightly more access to books in the European world, but not a lot. And they're still very slow to be produced and very kind of special. It's not like the paperback books we have around us all the time now in our lives. So then around 1440, Johannes Gutenberg invents the movable type printing press. And so Johannes Gutenberg is a German. He's in debt. And one anecdote I read said that he noticed that religious pilgrims would wear mirrors on their clothes when they went to religious sites to like gather up the holy vibes. And he didn't care about the mirrors, but he thought, oh, that's a great idea. Somebody's making a lot of money on those mirrors. What can I do to make some money? So I think it's interesting that the impulse behind the creation of the printing press was this very practical, sort of financially based consideration, but it ends up, transforming book production and learning, and really aids and abets the Reformation in ways he probably could have never imagined. So we're going to look at a Gutenberg printing press demo in a second, but very broadly, what his machine does is just dramatically increase the ability or the speed with which books can be produced, so they become cheaper and more people have access to them. And of course, the first thing that Gutenberg prints is an edition of the Bible. He prints an edition of the Vulgate. So now we're going to kind of shift to the discussion of the history of the Bible. So the Vulgate had been the standard Bible in Europe since the late 14th century, when it was commissioned by Pope Damasus. And it was originally, he asked Jerome to translate biblical texts into Latin. And Jerome did this thinking that it would make the Bible accessible to people because they could now read it in Latin or hear it in Latin. But that actually is not what came to pass, because most people in the Roman Empire and in the European setting didn't actually, they spoke a vernacular language. They didn't know Latin to read or to hear. So the Vulgate was not something that they could interact with directly. So between the Vulgate in the 5th century up through the Reformation, really the only vernacular Bibles we have or that are produced are those that are meant to be part of a missionary endeavor. So it's to bring pagan Europe into the Christian fold. And it's not really acceptable to translate the Bible into a vernacular language for any other reason. There's some sporadic attempts to create vernacular Bibles. They're often squashed. So one famous one is the case of the Wycliffe Bible. In, late 14th century England, John Wycliffe and his followers translate the Bible into Middle English. And it's known as the Wycliffe Bible. And it actually inspires the Lollards, who are an anti-Catholic movement. So immediately it gets associated with anti-Catholicism, and Wycliffe's Bible is squashed and copies are, suppressed. It's not a book, it's published in manuscript, or it's produced in manuscript form, but it was pretty widely distributed until people grabbed up the copies and said, you know, no more. We can't have people reading the Bible in English, in a language they can understand. And one of Wycliffe's contemporaries uttered this statement. This is from Henry Knighton. He said that the vernacular Bible would be the means by which the jewel of the church is turned into the common sport of the people. So you can see like I guess an impulse that's completely counter to the Reformation, which would say, yes, the Bible should be for the people. And Henry Knighton thinks that's a terrible idea. So when Gutenberg's printing press is invented in 1440, it's kind of born into a Europe that wants a vernacular Bible. And in many ways, it makes that the creation of a vernacular Bible possible through technology. So there's after Luther publishes the 95 Theses and kicks off the Protestant Reformation, the demand for a vernacular Bible becomes one of the central tenets of the Reformation. And it's hard to imagine that that would have been possible without the printing press having been invented in the middle of the 15th century. So we're going to look at 3 of our Reformation Bibles. We do have these. Some of them are back there. They're very large and very delicate, and so unfortunately you're not going to be able to get up close and personal with them in this setting, but
Gabriela, can I stop you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Just to give a little bit more context, where are you in the PHS building right now?
I'm in what's known as the processing room. So this is a space we thought we would have enough kind of throw of the camera for you to be actually able to see some of the Bibles behind.
Yeah, there they are.
Yeah.
That's great. And I just wanted to bring that up in case people were wondering about the rare books room versus where you are currently. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, the rare books room is so compact we couldn't, and it has no internet service, so can't be down there. So we've talked a little bit about this item when we talked about Henry Mccook. This is Erasmus's 1516 edition of the New Testament. And what's significant about this is that Erasmus went back to the original texts of the scripture in Greek. So he wanted people to be able to read the Gospels in the original language and not have to deal with this Latin translation that existed in the Vulgate. So he wants to give people direct access to the New Testament in its original language. So interestingly, he calls his first edition the Novum Instrumentum Omne instead of the Novum Testamentum, right? So he calls it the new instrument. And this is because, so bear with me, this logic is doesn't quite make a whole ton of sense to my head, but so he wanted to emphasize the fact for Erasmus, an instrument was a written compact between 2 people or 2 parties. So he really wanted to emphasize that the whole New Testament was a written document that enacted the compact or the promise between God and his followers. Whereas if you called it the New Testament, that would have been a spoken agreement and it wouldn't have had the weight of a written agreement. So that's why it's called initially the Novum Instrumentum. He also sets the title page in the shape of a chalice. And that is meant, again, to evoke the chalice of the Last Supper, which is where the compact between God and his followers are made through Jesus, right? That's when the new covenant is established. So it's really cool that there's this typographical detail that's kind of trying to speak to what Erasmus thinks, what the New Testament is doing in the world between God and his followers. He does, after this first edition of 1516, he goes back to Testament in the title. So I just gave you that explanation and then he changes it. Next up is a Luther Bible. So after Luther gets excommunicated by the Catholic Church in 1521, he decides to spend his time translating the Bible into German. He actually uses Erasmus's text as the basis for his own translation. So again, they're kind of pushing the Catholic Church's Vulgate aside and going back to the original texts. So Luther publishes a New Testament in 1522 and then a complete Bible in 1534. What we have is a 1599 copy, so a little bit later. What's really interesting about Luther's translation is that he believed that he should be using the German of the people, and so it has a very kind of earthy, demotic translation into German. It's not like high formal German. It's kind of like, you know, the slang of the day. And because it's so widely distributed across German-speaking countries in the 16th century, it actually helps standardize German for people in the Holy Roman Empire. And it actually kind of puts some words into the German language that are still there today. And then our last guy is the Great Bible. This is, let's see, this is the first authorized English Bible. It's authorized by King Henry VIII. It is largely based on a translation that was done by a gentleman called William Tyndale. And just 3 years before the Great Bible is published in 1536, poor William Tyndale had been executed as a heretic for daring to translate the Bible into English. So he, in 1526, Tyndale publishes a printed version of the New Testament in English using the movable type printing press. So it's the first English Bible, but it's not authorized. And again, it's deemed unacceptable to produce the Bible in English. So he gets, right, he's killed. But Henry VIII, who's just recently split with the Catholic Church, is like, okay, guys, I'm gonna get you an English Bible soon, in a hot minute. So he commissions this one, and it's created or prepared by Miles Coverdale, who really like kind of takes Tyndale's translation and uses it, not because he's plagiarizing, he actually had a lot of respect for Tyndale. So it's just kind of a terrible irony that Tyndale got killed for a translation that 3 years later becomes the first authorized English language Bible. So it comes out in 1539. We have a 1540 edition, and this is kind of an interesting problem that happens with rare book cataloging. As this book, our copy doesn't have a title page, and there were actually 3 different versions produced in 1540. So without the title page, it's hard to tell which one we have, and I would have to spend some more time seeing if there are other ways to differentiate between those 3 1540 editions before I could say, you know, do we have the April, July, or November edition of 1540?
Right. Great. And that was a lot of terrific information. I just want to let everybody know, in case they haven't had a chance to see the chat, that some of the links to information that Gabriela has touched on can be found there. Gabriela, you just ended talking about the Great Bible and how there's that question about which version from 1540 that comes from. One of the things that you might look at to establish which one it was the way that the type is set and that some of the differences about the printing. Would you tell us now a little bit more about how Bibles are made in that era so that we can kind of get a little bit more of a handle on, you know, how these books came together?
Right, yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about the printing revolution, but you actually haven't seen what, how the press works. So I think this is something best accomplished with a visual demonstration. So I'm going to show you two videos. If I can get my screen share together here. So the first one, just so you know, they're going to produce a single page of text, which is not how books were commonly assembled, Bible or otherwise. Usually many pages were printed on the front and back of a sheet, and then it was folded to create the pages of the book. I think Kristen's going to drop into the chat a much longer video, 30 minutes, that really goes into the detail about rare book creation and format. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you one video and then show you another one that gives you a better sense of that multi-page typesetting.
A perfectly composed block of metallic type would be secured with a cord made of hemp. This would be wound 3 or 4 times around it, a loop made, and this in turn pulled tight with a bodkin. This enabled the block of metallic type to be transferred to the galley of the printing press. There it would be wedged tightly into the cradle of the press. 2 firm leather inking pads would be used to rub printing ink, made from linseed oil and soot, evenly across the entire metallic surface. Next, as shown in this reconstruction of the Gutenberg printing press, dampened sheets of paper would be positioned very carefully within the frame, forming a partial lid for the cradle. By means of a hand crank, positioned below a rectangular pan, the cradle mechanism is closed. With a powerful tug on the so-called press bar, a large screw was made to turn. This action pressed the pan against the lid of the cradle, the sheet of paper held within that lid, and the freshly inked block of metallic type. Finally, the sheet of paper, at this point printed only on one side, was taken out of the printing press and hung up on a line to dry.
All right, let's see. And video number 2 coming right up. Oops. Maybe. No. Almost
Just
there.
so everybody's clear, that's not an on-site video. There's not an actual printing press, hand press in the basement of PHS, although we do have a digitization studio.
Do we have a German guy?
No, neither the German guy nor the hand press.
Okay, so here's the second video, which has no sound, but just pay attention to the way they're doing many pages at once. So there you see 8 pages being set at once.
This is like the perfect anecdote for looking at my phone too much.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there. That's about the end. They don't actually go into binding. Okay. So now that you've gotten a little bit of a visual of how the process works, I think you can see that even though the Gutenberg press was a dramatic innovation in terms of like speeding up book production, it's still very labor intensive. Especially, I took a class once on hand setting type, and when you're not good at it, the process of assembling the words from those little metal type blocks is incredibly slow. So in that connection, I want to show you 2 more Bibles from our collection that I think are interesting from kind of a printing standpoint. And of course, they are also Reformation Bibles. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. So this is the Geneva Bible, a couple pictures from it. The Geneva Bible was first published in 1560, and it was created by Reformation leaders who fled to Geneva during the reign of Mary Tudor, who was not amenable, right, to the Reformation impulse. This is actually the primary Bible of 16th century Protestantism. So this is the Bible that was used by Shakespeare, by Oliver Cromwell, John Knox, and John Donne. And it's actually one of the Bibles that, not this particular one, but a Geneva Bible came to the US on the Mayflower. So what's important about the Geneva Bible is that for the first time, a Bible, it's a mechanically printed, mass-produced English language Bible that comes with a variety of study guides and aids to help the person understand this Bible. So again, it's really, this is the Reformation saying, we want you to be able to understand the Holy Word and the Scripture. We don't want it to obfuscate. We want you to understand. It's also meant to be inexpensive. So in the late 16th century, it's likely that a Geneva New Testament would have been cost less than a week's wages of even the lowest paid laborer. So it's meant to be accessible. So some of the things that are unique about this Bible that then get picked up in Bibles published after 1560 are that books of the Bible are divided into verses. And then there's marginalia, printed marginalia, like you see these things. These are all set by hand, but these are cross references from one verse to the other. So again, trying to help the reader understand the Bible. It's the first Bible to have indexes, like you see here on the right-hand side of your screen. It has maps. At the beginning of each book of the Bible, there's a summary that tells the reader what's going to happen. So it's really, it's like a very, very user-friendly Bible, which I think is just kind of captures the Reformation impulse. But I think also from a technology standpoint, it's amazing to think of the work that went into creating something like this. Like you have to hand set all of this. It's mind-boggling. And then another Bible from our collection. Oops, sorry, that's the Geneva Bible. We have two. See, we have a big guy and a little guy with my hand for scale. So you can see again, this little guy is meant to be owned and taken with you in your daily life. So it's again meant to be just a regular person's Bible. So the first, or not the first, in 1611, King James authorizes another version of the English Bible because he didn't like the Geneva Bible. It didn't conform well enough to Church of England, like structure and ecclesiology. So he commissions another Bible that becomes kind of the preeminent Bible of the English Protestant world from 1611 until now. So this is the Authorized English Bible that is still in use today. It's published in 1611. We are in the rare position of having two copies of the 1611 edition. And this is very special because there's a togographical error in the very first ones that are printed that is quickly corrected. So I'm going to show you what that error looks like. It is in the book of Ruth so it's in the book of Ruth at 3:15. And on the left, you see where my finger is pointing in the picture. It says, she went into the city. So the first ones were printed with this personal pronoun, and then somebody said, no, that's supposed to be a he. So that little bit of type was reset, and then more were printed with the he. So this is known as the he-she Bible. They're both very rare because they're 1611. They're both 1611 editions of the King James Bible, so first editions. But the she Bible is especially rare because there just weren't that many created before it got pulled off the press. So I think, again, it's just neat to see how, because of the hand nature of the work, right, human error slips in and then it produces these anomalies and errors and mistakes that become just really interesting 500 years later.
Yeah. And is that why PHS has those two different versions of the King James, because of that one typesetting error?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's the error that gives the he-she Bibles their names. But apparently there's a lot of typographical errors in this first edition because it was printed by 3 different printers. So one printer was told to print one section, one printer was told to print another, and there's like apparently a lot of like textual instability because of that.
Yeah. Well, That's great. More terrific, historical information about what makes those printings really valuable and interesting. Brings me to my next question for you, Gabriela, which is, we have these items in the collections. These are Bibles, even the he/she, that can be accessed online now. There are digital versions of them available, and also other repositories hold these Bibles. So what is it about this collection and these items that PHS values so much that we set aside time and resources to preserve them and to keep them sort of available here?
Mm-hmm. That is a good question. One quick answer is that paper lasts. So it would not be wise to, they've lasted 500 years already. We're not sure how long digital formats are going to last, but we know this paper's got a good life to it, especially when it's been cared for appropriately. But also, when you get a kind of sizable collection of any kind of one type of item like Bibles in one place with all these variations across, languages and when they were printed and the cultures that produced them, that's a really rich resource for a researcher who can come and just work with that collection all at once and kind of track changes in, what books are considered canonical in the Bible if you're interested in the history of the Bible from that perspective, or perhaps you're interested in looking at a wide variety of Bibles to sort of understand like how those Bibles reflect cultural shifts in the cultures that produce them. So it's great to have a large sample for people to study all in one place. And of course, because of the primacy of the Bible in the life of Christian families, they often have family histories noted in the on the bookends. Maybe there's ephemeral material about a family or the community in which they live tucked into the Bibles, and that's the kind of thing you can't replicate so well online.
Great. Well, that seems so important to acknowledge that Bibles are valuable because of what's printed in them, but in the other history that they've kind of gathered into them. I know that there are a lot of other items, not just Bibles, that have similar kind of stories that PHS is a part of the collections. And for me, those are always fascinating to stumble upon the marginalia or the notes that have been written inside publications dedicating them to somebody else.
Yeah.
We have a couple more minutes before we wanted to go ahead and take some questions. And there have been some great questions coming in. So we want to make sure we have time for that. Let me just ask you a couple more questions, Gabriela. One is about bridging the rare books collection, the older Bibles that we have, into the 20th century collections that we have. PHS has continued to collect Bibles. We don't just have Bibles from the Reformation or 17th or 18th century. We have more contemporary printings. Can you call up, one or two of them that are sort of stand out to you as interesting examples from the 20th century?
Sure thing. So I've got two. See if we can get there. So when I was down in the rare book vault, I saw the Good News for Modern Man Bible on the shelf, published in 1969, and I recognized it immediately from this religious news service image that we have in Pearl, our digital library. This is Mamie Eisenhower holding this. So I didn't know much about this particular Bible, but I recognized it from the picture, and it kind of struck me as odd. I was surprised to see a former president's name so firmly attached to a Bible. I just didn't know that happened as recently as 1969. So it prompted me to do a little reading, and I didn't know that Dwight Eisenhower was such a faith-based president. Like, it was really important to him. And I learned that it's actually during his administration, the phrase "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance, and the national motto became "In God We Trust." So not so much to say about the printing history or content of this particular Bible, but it did send me on this little journey of discovery about Eisenhower. And then, oops, sorry, I hope you didn't all hear that noise my computer made. This one, I find the foreign language Bibles super interesting. This is a 20th century Korean New Testament. And what is especially interesting to me about this one is that it has a property stamp from the United Presbyterian Mission Library in it. So this tells us that this particular copy came out of a collection that was meant to educate missionaries before they went out into the mission field. And Presbyterians missionized very heavily in Korea. They were very successful in missionizing in Korea. But I think it's neat that this particular copy kind of makes clear with this property stamp how much the Bible in the vernacular is a part of the missionary project.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. And that image right there reminds me of something I saw in the chat earlier, which is somebody was asking a question about seeing a printing, a stamp from the Historical Society or from the National Church put into a Bible. Mm-hmm. Can you just remind people why we do that at PHS and why other special collection libraries and cultural institutions do that sort of thing?
Why they put property stamps in?
Mm-hmm.
To protect them from theft. Now, you shouldn't put them on pre-1800 books, but a lot of ours do because they were collected before that standard was adopted. But now we wouldn't put a big ink stamp on an 18th century book. But you do want to in some way identify it as yours in case it gets taken.
Right. And back to that idea that even though we have information that says that somewhere, if it's not together with the item, that the reader could lose sight of that. One last question for you, Gabriela. It's a personal one. I hope you don't mind being put on the spot. Wink, wink. Is there a Bible that is at PHS, a part of the PHS collections that is a favorite of yours?
Yeah, I'm going to say the Geneva Bible, which we talked about a little bit, and it's not just because I'm half Swiss. I just think I studied modernist literature. I love a textual apparatus. I think it's the printing aspect of that, like all the stuff that we looked at that must have been so hard to create. I think just makes it something that is kind of like jaw-dropping to me. That may be a mundane aspect of a Bible to other people, but I think that's really neat. And it's the Bible that to me most exemplifies that Reformation impulse to put people kind of in direct contact with biblical texts and the sacred texts, because it just does all this work to help you understand the text, and I appreciate that about it. I certainly would need that help if I were to really dive in.
Great. Those all seem like great reasons to hold up the Geneva Bible. So thank you very much, Gabriela. That was terrific information. Those slides and this video are going to be made available after this session so that people can sort of look at it more, and we'll look for other opportunities to share out all of that information that Gabriela has culled and put together that tells the story about these amazing printings. I think now might be a good time to go ahead and bring Kristen in. I think we have some questions, and I saw up earlier in the chat there was one or two things that people were asking about as well. So Kristen, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you guys for this great presentation. We have a couple of questions that popped up in the chat. Jean has two questions. She was first wondering if PHS specializes in any specific type of Bible, like Bibles from the Reformation era or Bibles that missionaries carried with them, or some other type of Bible.
I mean, we tend more towards the Bibles of the Protestant world, but there are a significant amount of Latin Bibles, early Latin Bibles, and Vulgate editions in our collection. We actually have a 1609 Vulgate somewhere behind me. A lot of our Bibles, because they came from donors, either Henry Mccook or one-off donors, like somebody found a Bible and sent it to us. there hasn't been a concerted effort just to get one kind of Bible. I think this collection was amassed by us taking whatever Bible somebody wanted to give us.
Jean was also wondering if you don't mind pulling up the slide that you showed earlier of the lists of the different languages.
Oh, sure.
Of Bibles in our collection. Jean was wondering if there are any Scottish or Irish Gaelic Bibles.
Yes, there's definitely an Irish Bible. There's an Irish and a Scottish Gaelic. I think there's a couple. Let's see. Let's see, are you seeing, am I sharing my screen? Yes. So 4 Gaelic, and I'm not seeing Irish, but it's on here. Anyone? Bueller? Anyway, we have some Irish as well. Irish.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to claim the prize, Gabriela. I see it. It's about 2/3 of the way down the second column, underneath, or right above Portuguese.
There's only one Irish. Okay, and that's an early 19th century. It's 1807, and it's published by the British Foreign Bible Society. So I suspect it's meant to get those Irish to stop being Catholic and start being Protestant.
Mark was wondering, well, he has a King James Bible that doesn't have a date, and he thinks it's from the 1840s. And he was wondering why Bibles aren't dated.
I don't know. That's a good question. Does it have a title page and it's just not on there?
I'll give Mark a chance to answer that. And in the meantime, William was wondering, when did the first picture of Christ show up in which Bible and from what time?
I don't know. That's a great question. I would think it would be, I mean, the technology that allows easy, inexpensive addition of illustrations to books is 20th century technology. So I would think probably early 20th century, but I don't know. It's a great question.
Does anybody else have any questions? Let me just run through these one more time. Don't want to miss anyone.
And I'm going to share, because I forgot, to share the slide with my contact information if people want to send me questions via email. We're going to relive the whole presentation. There. I'm G. Zoller at historypcusa.org.
William was also wondering, if the Bible you showed earlier, the pronouns were altered, and if that kind of changes the context of the narrative.
I think so, but I don't know the text, the actual like biblical text well enough to say how dramatically it shifts the meaning. I suspect that there must be some scholarly treatment of that question.
Does anyone else have any questions? I think Fred might have a question.
No, I have a question. How do I unmute myself on a Zoom? I'm really struggling today to do it. I had an observation, which again, Gabriela, thank you so much for that great presentation. I think this is one of those areas that we know people are really interested in, and we have a wonderful, world-class collection that speaks to this history. So following up with questions for Gabriela about our rare books collection is a great way to proceed. And let us know also about, any of the stories that you heard about that you'd like us to explore more, we can put together, some more information and make that available to you. One of the slides that Gabriela had up was drawing people's attention to something we like to remind people of, which is that these sessions and the other work that happens at PHS are very much made possible by the support you receive from donors. So there it is back on screen. Thank you for preparing that slide and having that information there, Gabriela. This is a time of the year when we're keen to remind people about our appreciation for your support. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being here at this session.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.